Hello, and welcome back to my little corner of the internet once again. Today I'd like to talk to you about a condition that I have that maybe some of you heard of, possibly a lot of you haven't, called dyspraxia. I've actually got a YouTube channel where I've done a lot of videos on dyspraxia with a good friend of mine called Barbara Neal, and we've talked about how dyspraxia can impact different parts of a person's life. So if you're interested in more detailed kind of conversations about how it affects us on a sort of a personal level, then you can go and search for the two dyspraxics on YouTube. But I just want to talk to you a little bit about kind of what dyspraxia is, just in very general terms. It's what's called a neurological condition in that it affects the brain and sort of how the brain is wired. There are a lot of different sort of neurological conditions. Some people have sort of taken to calling it neurospicy more recently. I'm not sure I'm entirely keen on that. I prefer sort of neurological because I say it affects the wiring and how the brain is sort of formed in a way. Um, if you're watching this and you haven't got dyspraxia or any other kind of condition like that, you'd be neurotypical, and I'm neurodiverse because I say my brain is wired slightly differently than the majority of the population. Doesn't mean that I'm massively different to anyone. It just means that I've got slightly different wiring to achieve the same result. But of course, that does mean that there are some differences with my dyspraxia. With dyspraxia as a condition, not just mine, it can affect things like how you walk, how you balance, how you coordinate. Many years ago it was known rather clumsily as the clumsy child condition because you would see people losing their balance more, just being uncoordinated with their feet, not being able to hold a pencil or a pen very well, things like that. So you'd be sort of known as uncoordinated and just clumsy. But there was a reason for it with some children. You had this condition called dyspraxia. Couldn't kick a football very well, couldn't sort of judge how well it was going to go or how far it was going to go necessarily. Um, but also there's a component of how it affects the brain, what you can't see, in that there are things that it affects like time management sometimes for some people, planning, organisational ability, and so on. It doesn't mean that we're stupid or anything like that. It doesn't affect our IQ. It just affects how we perceive life sometimes and time and planning, like I just said. Um, there is a spectrum to dyspraxia, like with a lot of conditions. You get one spectrum called quite the larger end of it, which you will have everything impacted by dyspraxia. Your vocal cues and mannerisms and just general speech, like how it affects neurologically the invisible bits, how it affects your physical self, your planning, your ability to balance and coordinate, etc. So it's very maybe obvious that you have dyspraxia. At the other end of the spectrum, you have a very mild end where maybe you're just a little bit uncoordinated, a little bit of hand-eye coordination problems, but not too much, and you will probably just confuse that for being just a little bit uncoordinated. I'm somewhere in the middle, typically, wouldn't you believe it? So I didn't realise I was dyspraxic until I was about 15, when a teacher at the school I was going to at the time made a throwaway comment to my parents in my hearing saying, "Oh, is Matthew doing well despite his dyspraxia at school?" And the three of us looked at him as if to say, "What? What are you talking about? What do you mean dyspraxia?" And we were looking at him like that because we didn't have a clue what he was talking about, because the school had sort of figured out that I was dyspraxic but hadn't bothered telling me. I'd never had it diagnosed before because I'd never gone to the doctor about my coordination, and I can be disorganised a little bit sometimes, and obviously we'd never gone to the doctor about that because that's not a medical issue necessarily. So that was always a little bit of an oddity. But now we had this explanation. It explained why I sometimes feel awkward in social situations because I was dyspraxic, and that's part of that. Sometimes social cues, social gatherings can be complex and difficult and hard to understand and process. It explained why I was so uncoordinated and unbalanced because I was dyspraxic. How I sometimes struggled with coordination and planning to a huge degree because I was dyspraxic. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm not capable of doing all of those things. It doesn't mean I'm not capable of going to social gatherings and making friends. It doesn't mean that I'm not capable of planning an organisation. It just means I have to put a lot of effort in, or some extra work in to make it work, which can be hard at times because you're having to think of extra things, extra steps to make sure that it works for you. And what works for me doesn't necessarily work for the next dyspraxic person, because I say it is a spectrum and everyone will interpret their dyspraxia in their own unique way to a degree. Someone's experience with sort of more higher end dyspraxia will be different to someone who's sort of very mildly affected. It does seem to affect more boys than girls. We don't quite know why. Is it because boys are just more easily diagnosed, or is there a component where boys are more prone to having the condition? We don't know. But as I say, I do know women with the condition. My good friend Barbara and I, as I say, we've got a YouTube channel where we talked about all this kind of stuff where dyspraxia affected our lives in some way, and how we overcame it, because both of us had the view that we wanted it to be positive. We didn't want people to feel sorry for us, and I still feel that to this day. I'm not looking for sympathy, I'm looking for empathy. I'm not looking for tolerance, I'm looking for acceptance. I don't want to be tolerated. I want to find a way that I can do the same thing as everyone else. It may take me slightly longer, in a slightly different way, but I can do it. So I think that's a good rule for life, really, that actually we shouldn't have a one-size-fits-all society. We should have a more diverse society that allows us to help people and accept people and actually have a more tolerant society. I've just used the word tolerance, even though I don't necessarily like it. I can't quite think of the language I'm trying to convey there, but we need to accept people and allow people that difference to explore who they are, what they are, and how best they can achieve the goals they want for themselves. And it's taken me a long time to kind of understand that, and it was quite difficult at times to try and fit into a society that was designed for neurotypical people, not for neurodiverse people like me. So it can be a positive as well. Dyspraxia can be a positive. I personally feel that my creativity has been, I don't know whether amplified is quite the right word, but I do feel that my creativity is certainly supported by my dyspraxia, and I'm a writer, and I feel I've really benefited from that. I like to think I'm more of a problem solver, because I've had to overcome problems and think about how to deal with things in my life because of that. So dyspraxia isn't a catastrophe, isn't the end. Your IQ is affected, your compassion, hopefully your love, isn't affected. Why do I say hopefully? It isn't. I know it isn't. So we are here. We're slightly invisible, except in the slightly clumsy sense maybe, but we are very passionate about the world around us. So if you know someone who has dyspraxia, just accept them. Don't tolerate them. Accept them and support them as they try and find their way in this sometimes slightly confusing, very diverse world. And that's the thing. We are diverse, and it's something to be proud of and embrace. And more of that, please, I think. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you again soon.